morning, members. We are slightly over time, but we are quorate, so we are going to kick off. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I've had apologies from Assembly Member Shah, Assembly Member Whittle, and Assembly Member Prince, for whom Assembly Member Hall is substituting, so thank you to her for coming. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Can we note the offices held by Assembly members? And are there any other disclosable pecuniary interests in specific items listed on the agenda that you want to declare at this time? Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Can we confirm those and can I sign them as a correct record? Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Item 4 is the summary list of actions. Can we note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings of the Oversight Committee? Thank you. Item 5 is the pay and grading review. Mary, would you like to briefly introduce that paper?
Yes, thank you. This is what I am hoping is a first conversation with you all about our pay and grading structure, and really sets out the piece of work that I am planning to commission before I come back to you again with a more considered view about what we need to do. So as this paper lays out, there are a number of challenges that we face related mainly to our workforce, around recruitment and retention, that it would appear stem from the fact that our pay and grading structure is now 15 years old, and because job descriptions haven't been reviewed and because overall pay bands haven't been reviewed, we do find ourselves in situations laid out in the paper that are causing me some concern. I can't categorically at the moment tell you about the link between our current pay and grading structure and some of these challenges. I'm pretty confident these challenges come as a result of it. But I want to embark now on an exercise to gather proper data and evidence so that I can come back to you with a clearer recommendation about whether or not we do indeed need to review the pay and grading structure in full or in part. But I wanted to make sure that you're sighted on my intentions around this first piece of work.
Any member? We are asked to note the report. We're asked to note the subsequent discussion. There hasn't been one, but we will note the report. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, item 6 is the changes to the GLA establishment scrutiny team. Anastasia, I gather you're going to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can give you a short summary of the paper, I think I can allow myself to say that it won't come as a surprise to the members sat here that this review has been a long time coming. The scrutiny team has never been comprehensively reviewed since its inception 19 years ago. In the lead up to my appointment, there has been an internal review conducted around a year ago with Assembly members, with the scrutiny team, and with external stakeholders, which pointed to a clear need to change the way in which the scrutiny team is working. After I have been appointed, there has been an all-secretariat discussion around what we need to be delivering going forward, new key strategic goals that Assembly members have signed up to, and as awkward as it is to refer to myself, I have been appointed to try and establish new ways of working within the team. So having taken all of that in the round and having observed during my time here how we work with other teams in the Secretariat, it became clear to me that there are a number of objectives that we need to be delivering for Assembly members in how we support them that we currently cannot do with the existing structure. One of those objectives is to be able to work in a more flexible way, in a more dynamic way, and what this means is not just buzzwords, it's truly being able to respond to events as and when they occur and make sure that the Assembly is at the forefront of what is happening in London. Another one is us as a team being able to provide strong policy expertise and credible advice to Assembly members as and when is needed on a range of issues, from legislative matters to policy areas. We also currently, in the existing structure, don't have capability to provide support on projects that are not directly linked to committee work. However, there is increasingly demand and interest in us being able to provide that. And finally, I think there is room for improvement of lines of accountability and responsibility within the team, which ultimately can only lead to a better service for members. So taking all of that in the round and looking at the existing structure, I have come to the conclusion that it is necessary to review it comprehensively. In the new structure that I am proposing the following 5 types of roles. To briefly go through them, I'm proposing the establishment of 5 senior policy advisor roles at grade 10. These roles are meant to design and deliver a work program for Assembly members and to be accountable for the advice given to Assembly members on a day-to-day basis. I'm proposing the establishment of a research and operations manager, also at grade 10, and this role really has the responsibility for the line management within the team. I'm proposing also the establishment of 10 policy advisor roles. So this is a team that will be responsible for specific project delivery for various committees and for any other work for Assembly members. I'm also proposing the establishment of 4 research analysts whose task would be to really focus on regular monitoring of data that could support the work of the Assembly and individual Assembly members. And finally, the establishment of 1 administration officer post to support the day-to-day running of the team. Now, what that means in practice is that looking at the existing structure, all of the existing posts are proposed for deletion. However, in terms of the next steps for the team, everyone in the team is ring-fenced, I think uniquely in the history of the GLA, for 3 roles for ring-fenced interview, up or down. This means that the majority of the team will be able to apply for at least, will be able to apply for 4 roles, as many as 4 roles in the new structure. A few will be applying, if they wish to, for 3, and a very discrete number will be ring-fenced for 2. So the existing team has a significant number of opportunities to find a place in the new structure. We are currently, of course, in the formal consultation period, which will end next Monday. Following that, if the structure is, of course, approved by this committee and by the head of paid service, the new structure will be confirmed in early April. Interviews are due to take place mid to late April, with the new structure in place in early May by the time of the AGM and the start of the new work program. So there is more in the paper that I could go into detail on, but I will stop here and will be happy to answer questions.
Okay, many thanks for that. I imagine a number of members may want to come in. I'll get the ball rolling. Notwithstanding the mayor review, which took place, I think, around about 18 months or so ago, there wasn't widespread discontent with the way the scrutiny function was operating. So I suppose the obvious starting point is this really needed? Did you really need to go into something so far-reaching in what you proposed?
Well, I would say that yes. It's a bit hard for me to discuss this because a lot of my evidence would be based on surveys that happened before I joined. For my part, as soon as I joined, I spent a lot of time talking individually to Assembly members, and the resounding feedback that I got was that things do need to change. But I'm also aware that there have been surveys conducted which showed that over the years there has been a decrease in Assembly members' satisfaction with the service provided by the scrutiny team. I don't know if this is something that you...
Sure. Just a bit of context. So when I took over as director in summer 2017, I was really taken aback because I've worked in Secretariat since 2000 by the anecdotal evidence as I then, in my new role, saw all members. There was a level of unhappiness that wasn't immediately apparent above the surface when I engaged in a series of discussions. There was a level of dissatisfaction there. that was quite tangible. We then had a change at senior management level. The former head of scrutiny departed, and it seemed, given as I say, the feedback that we were getting, I wanted to put that into a sort of proper process, and we commissioned a review. So, sorry, Chairman, it was last year, so it was a bit more recent than 18 months ago. So last spring, former chief executive came in and talked to nearly 80 people. And again, the feedback there, and it's set out in the report, was quite pronounced. We were presented with a series of, and I say that pulled together a lot of the views that were out there from members, from the team and from others, into quite a long list of issues to grapple with. We didn't rush at it. We took some time thinking through about the actions that we were going to take. And through that process, looking at the actions, the actions to redress some of the problems, but also to take the service forward, it became clear, and it wasn't where we started from, but it became clear that the structure was getting in the way. Not the people, but the structure. Because, and she has referred to it, and it's clear in the review report, I think there's phrases like bang for buck is not part of the culture. You know, there was an issue about performance management, lack of it, that was quite pronounced, and there's other issues that could go into where the structure, as I say, was getting in the way. And then we went through a process of an informal consultation on structural options, and that's brought us to today. So we've gone quite slowly, quite carefully, not taking away from the fact that we are proposing a major change, and it's not something we do lightly. But we've checked every step of the way through informal consultations, through reviews. There has been a member survey, as Anna said, in 2018, and that showed a drop-off in satisfaction again. So we've checked, and we're here today because we think this is needed. I would also say, again, as Anna pointed out, this is the first time there's been a comprehensive review of the service, so this is not something we do a lot, but it does mean, and that's sort of a good thing, but it does mean that when change is required, it means that we are dealing with a lot of issues all in one go, rather than the other areas of the Secretariat, even before we think about the rest of the building. So the party group teams are reviewed every 4 years after each election, and that means that when change comes, it tends not to be so significant because we keep reviewing, keep checking, go through a process of discussion with members a minimum of once every 4 years. Now that's not happening in this case, which means that when change comes, it's quite big. But we're here because we think it's needed.
Okay, well, I mean, linked to that, but before I go on, I've seen 3 members so far. Please be assured I haven't forgotten you 4 now. I've got a few more questions to run through myself, and then I'll throw it open to other members. But in terms of timing, you mentioned the political groups do their reviews every 4 years, which of course is perfectly true, largely because the funding they get is related to how many members they have, and elections change things. Now, with that in mind, we're on the final lap now leading into the next election. So I suppose the obvious question here is about timing. Why are we doing it this side of May 2020 and not post 2020?
Shall I? I'll keep going, if that's right, Jim. It's a fair question, and we thought a lot about this, but in order to take the careful steps that I outlined and try and be inclusive and try and, as I say, do sort of thorough reviews and proper consideration to some of the issues, that takes time. So we've not proposed something, we've not gone at this in a quick and dirty review fashion. We've tried to be comprehensive and careful. That takes a bit of time. So if we wait till after the election, so I became director in 2017, we're now in early 2019. So if we wait till after the election, then start a review process that is careful and considered, as I say, that could take us into 2021. Then, if we follow the same timescales, then we would be in 2022 before we're actually taking action, at which point the chairman of the Oversight Committee might be saying to me, well, the 2024 election is coming. So, using the parlance of the day, we don't want to kick the can down the road. We're responsible now.
Why not on the road?
Well, we're the responsible managers now. There's some issues in front of us now, and we are recommending that we move to address them now. Also, in these, and this is, I don't want to be too controversial, but in these politically sort of charged times, I think setting the scrutiny function to be more responsive, more dynamic, more into a less siloed approach, which is what we're proposing by looking at policy clusters, I think will serve the Assembly well going forward.
Okay, why just the scrutiny team then? Why not other teams in the Secretariat?
Again, I think that's a question for me. The scrutiny team has never been reviewed in this way, so I consider, this is my judgment, that the other teams so the committee services team, Lorena just caught my eye, has been through a sort of formal restructuring process 7 times in the last 10 years. 5 of those... Seven times. 5 of those were classified as major restructures, and 3 of them involved posts being deleted. So they've had significant amount of change. Not all of those restructures led to people leaving, and some of those restructurings, just very clear, were adding posts in. But I think if you were in the committee services team, you would feel there was a lot of change. We changed management structures, changed the whole nature of the team. In fact, it's gone into the shared services world. The party, so 7 times in 10 years. The party group teams every 4 years, and the communications team is already significantly different now to what I inherited 2 years ago. So again, there's been some major changes there. So I consider that most of the teams are either fit for purpose or much closer to being fit for purpose than the scrutiny structure is. So not the team, I'm not talking about individuals, but the structure, because we've been through significant reviews of those other teams.
All right. So I think one of the key changes...
Chairman, just at one point. When we've done fundamental reviews of other teams, we didn't put the scrutiny team through it, just to say. So it doesn't follow that it's all axiomatic the other way around, that because one team is under review, that other teams sort of have to be. We don't put people under review and put people at risk of redundancy lightly.
No. All right. Well, I'm going to talk about people in a moment, but one of the key changes is the creation of the research unit that AMSC has been proposing. Now, the Secretariat is effectively one big research unit. So I suppose, again, another obvious question is, why are you creating a research unit within a research unit?
So it's a fair question to ask. I think the distinction should be made not between research work and non-research work. It's about work that supports committees and investigations linked to committees and assembly-wide ongoing projects. So what really stood out to me in the last 6 months that I've been in post is that we don't do ongoing tracking of mayoral data. We don't do ongoing tracking of indicators that are important to Londoners, that are valuable to our work as the scrutiny function. When we have done that, when it was linked to a specific project for a committee on the Housing Committee, the monitor of the mayor's commitments on affordable housing, it was very well received and it was a very strong piece of work. But had we not had it on the agenda, it's not something that we would have undertaken. So by having a discrete group of people within the team who are intentionally dedicated to that kind of work, I'm confident that we will be able to support the work of committees better, but also produce more work for Assembly members and for the Assembly as a whole that will enhance our reputation.
Okay. I think other members maybe pick that up in a minute. Alongside this, the new proposed work programme for next year has been released. I think some members have expressed surprise at the way that's been done. Is this going to necessarily entail significant changes in the way the work programme is put together going forward?
The work programme is always in the hands of the London Assembly and of Assembly members. What is critical is that there is that the work that Assembly members are undertaking, and it is a significant amount of work, and the work that we do in supporting Assembly members does deliver for Londoners. is something that contains elements of thorough scrutiny of the GLA and of the mayor, which is our statutory function, and fundamentally is something that members will want to be taking on. So in terms of how this work program was proposed, it did not come out of the blue. It was based on suggestions and ideas from Assembly members themselves, and taking into consideration all these other factors of what is of importance to Londoners, what will have a thorough scrutiny element, and what will be some genuinely interesting projects for us to be working on, Assembly members and teams supporting them. So I think that fundamentally, the fundamental point of Assembly members owning the work program will continue. My intention is for my team to be able to support that better with more advice and with more suggestions, more proactive suggestions where appropriate.
Can I just add, Chairman, sorry, very quickly, in the Mayor report that we referred to, that's one of the areas, work programming and the way that it's been done in the past, that does stand out as an area that needed looking at. The way that anaesthetists come at it means that members get, at worst, or at least, some informed suggestions for their consideration, but it isn't then entirely.
And if I may add, one of the issues that has been flagged in the report, but also the last few months, is the not insignificant risk sometimes of duplication of work or of scheduling issues, and that is something that arises when we just look at the work programming on a committee by committee basis. But if we look at it in the round, as we are doing now, then we're able to see where there is potential for collaboration between committees, and also where there are potential issues, and we can think in advance before embarking on particular investigations on how we can mitigate that.
Okay. In your earlier remarks, Ed, you mentioned this is about structures, not people, but of course it does impact on people. So I've got a couple of questions about staffing. And the first one, I suppose, is duty of care, really, because as you said, this has not been reviewed for 15 years, I think 19 years or however long it was. But it impacts on every single member of the Secretariat scrutiny staff. Every one of them, their post is up for deletion. Every one of them, therefore, has the threat of redundancy hanging over them. Did it have to be done in this way? Is there any way that it could have been done in a different way? I'm thinking about duty of care, really, because it's a prolonged process. It's very worrying for anyone, even though, taking your point that there are opportunities for people going forward, it's still a worrying time. Is there any other way it could be done?
I fully take the point that it is very difficult to be going through this process. There are different ways of embarking on something like this, and I would stand by the way that we have done that. And I know some teams sometimes announce potential restructures simply through a meeting and the launch of the formal consultation immediately afterwards. This is not what we have done. We announced the potential for a restructure as early as that became apparent. Afterwards, we launched an informal consultation period with the staff and with Assembly members, where we explained our thinking, we tested out our thinking, suggested some potential options, all of which meant that the period overall is longer, but it means that it's not something that has just been presented to staff out of the blue. And now that we are in, of course, the formal consultation period, I'm being extremely responsive to all questions that are being asked. I have issued a Q&A document to the team. I'm going to update that. I have had one-to-one meetings with the team, and I will continue responding to requests as and when they come in as quickly as possible. So I for my part, am extremely mindful of that aspect, Chairman, and I will continue to make sure that all staff are fully supported throughout this process.
All right, final question from me, and then I'm going to have to throw it open because I've now got 5 members indicated. You talked about staff being able to develop policy expertise or provide policy expertise. Yesterday, I received, and I'm assuming all members received, the response from the Unison GLA branch secretary, which was a 7-page letter covering a multitude of issues. One of which caught my eyes on page 2, and I'll quote the relevant section. We also remain concerned that the proposed structure is likely to provide a poorer quality of service to AMs and committee chairs than they receive at present, as resources are diverted away. Matrix management becomes ever more complex, and junior staff are denied the opportunities for developing specific policy expertise. Do you have a response to that?
So on the point of support for assembly members, I have to say I do not agree with that suggestion. Support for assembly members is going to increase with this new structure. If one were to compare the proposed structure with the existing structure and just looking at an individual person assigned per committee, it might appear that there is less support in the new structure. But in reality, there will still be one single point of contact for assembly members. This person will have greater accountabilities than, say, someone in that role currently does have. There will be a research unit to support the work of that committee. There will be project managers, in effect, the people who are responsible for running the projects from the policy advisor pool. And there can be multiple people drawn into particular pieces of work as and when is needed, whereas now we are basically restricted by the people who are assigned per individual committee. So I would say that if one were to think of the maximum possible support that a committee could get, it would be myself, assistant director, it would be the senior policy advisor in the new structure, it would be one, maybe two policy advisors, and there would also be the research unit. So in terms of support that assembly members will be getting, our intention is to be providing more support of better quality and as soon as it's required. So on that point, I'm fairly confident that the proposals will deliver on that.
Okay, I'm going to throw it open now. In the order that I saw them, we have some Assembly members O'Connell, Berry, Copley, Hall and Duval. So Assembly member O'Connell, you're first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, clarification. And typically the Chair has taken some of my questions, which is very good, and answered some of my questions. However, whilst I accept there's always a need to review structures and procedures, that is the professional way to do things, I've got one or two concerns that I'd like to amplify. And I'm speaking really from a context of the 3 years being the Chair of Police and Crime Committee, because I have to give you that experience, and I think you'd expect that. And I probably have to say for the record that I would have a less than resounding response of dissatisfaction from the service I've had. So I've been happy and I've responded accordingly with the service I've had from scrutiny officers. I think that's important to point out. I'm glad the Chair opened the sort of Pandora's box of the work programme, because I was loath to do that, but I'm glad that's been mentioned, because that's linked, has to be linked to this debate, and I think we're covering the work programme on the next committee meeting on the 6th of April, I believe, because that's coming to us then, but clearly it's connected. And I'd like to pick up the point, which is the last point you made, around the expertise. So in other words, flexibility. I see it as flexibility potentially versus an expertise that has been built up. So I'm concerned, I'm echoing the Chair's possible concern. I did hear your response, but I'm not persuaded by it, that I am worried that there will be less of an opportunity for officers to build up the knowledge and expertise around their area if they're working across areas. So I see that just as a logical end game of this. I also worry that the senior policy advisors, again I'm thinking in the context of what I'm used to into a new world, will be responsible for more than one committee. Okay? So at the moment you'll have, I'd assume you'll have senior officers responsible for their one committee. Now they'll be across other committees, and that also concerns me. And I just wanted to reiterate again the point that the Chairman made about the effect on staff. We've all in our corporate lives been through these sort of changes, and it's prolonged and considered, your words, which is correct, but there is an effect on morale. I just need to reinforce that point. So I've got some questions about this expertise versus flexibility, senior officers working across. And my last point is I think we've been asked here to respond as a committee. Will members themselves, notwithstanding they might have input earlier in the process, be able to respond themselves formally to these proposals in an individual basis? Because we may have separate, we are bound by the committee's points, but we might have our own views. I see people scowling at me, but I'm used to that. Right, a response, please.
So if I take the points on expertise and flexibility first, so I would describe the new proposals as combining both of them. So yes, you have correctly identified that one of the intentions is to have flexibility of moving people around and scaling up resources up and down when needed. However, and I have received this question from the team, and I have said that we will be taking into consideration individuals' preferences in terms of whether they want to be building up expertise in a particular area. Yes, we need to be looking at what is the business need. Say, if there's a project that takes a significant amount of time and resource, the London plan or the like, we would need to be putting that first and foremost, but individual development is also important to us, so we will be taking that forward. In terms of the expertise of the senior policy advisors, yes, there will be more responsibility, more accountability for them, but the caliber of work that will be expected from those post holders will require an ability to move between. These are not, by the way, in the clusters, they're not completely distinct areas. There are links between them. To be able to see the links, which hopefully will help in our intention to produce assembly-wide work. And I'm confident that people working at that level will be able to do that and not reduce the service provided to members.
Can I just add to that? At the moment, there are 2 senior managers in the team, 2 senior posts under anaesthesia covering all committees between 2. So we're proposing 5 senior people, and there are people in the team who work across other committees, and that is across a number of committees, and that is seen, I think, within the team and by us, and I think by members, as a successful model as well. So combining people who work across a number of committees with people who've got specialisms and some senior input as well. So there are good things in existence that we are trying to build on. But it's not true at the moment that everybody in the team just works on one. As I say, at a senior level, the 2 senior people have been working across a range of committees already, and I don't think that's been felt to be an inherent problem.
Well, I've got the stage just lastly on the work programme, just from my own record, and we will be discussing this more fully next month because you circulated proposed work programme, particularly P&C. I'm the outgoing chair, the incoming chair will have his own opinions. But just for the record, that confirming your points, I do have some concerns, and this is probably not for a lengthy debate now, about work programmes and the ownership by members of work programmes. I've experienced this quite fully, scars on my back, about members need to have ownership of work programmes. That's for another day, but I think we need to make a comment on that.
Okay. Right, Assemblymember Berry.
Thank you very much for this and for giving us the chance to comment. Some of the answers, some of the questions that have been asked are questions that I would have asked too. Thank you for the answer on the purpose of the research function, because I fully agree with that. It's something I very much discussed with Sir Anthony Mayor. The need for ongoing monitoring of mayoral data, extracting of mayoral data, not relying necessarily on the mayor's sort of will to be transparent, but getting in there and just spotting trends and all of that. I think that's really good. Like the other members, I received Unison's letter, and I think they make some points that are worth answering, and I hope that you will be answering those in full. I think possibly you're legally required to do that. They make some points about regrading, about the question of why everybody's been put at risk. They make some points about job specifications, which I'm not qualified to ask about, but they seem like good points to me, and I hope that you'll look at those. My questions are really about the structure, the actual line management structure that you've laid out in the diagram, which I will now ping up. This is different than I imagined, and different than I think option B was presented to Assembly members originally, in that the research department, as it were, isn't now separate. It doesn't currently have a manager. The senior policy advisors are in a sort of senior team, and everybody else is being line managed now by this operations manager. And I think the Unison letter makes some very good points about the questions about how this affects the work and the service that might be received. Primarily, they say, having somebody who line manages 14 people and is expected to take an overview of the sort of knowledge areas as well, may be very, very tricky for that person. And then you've got the question of within the service to the committees and the sort of expertise side of things, you now don't have the senior policy advisors attached particularly as line managers to particular what are now policy advisors. And I worry about that, because I think you do need team working in this situation. So it's not so much about the individual being the question of expertise versus flexibility. I think the staff feeding back say they would appreciate more flexibility, but it's a question of team working versus being quite distributed and line managed in different ways. I think maybe you'll end up with team working without line management, which could be a potential problem there. And then so that's my real question about that. Why the flat structure now? The other question I think that's a really good point is how the new structure and the process is going to accommodate part-time working. Are the posts able to be applied for part-time? Do people need to apply for job shares, for example, in order to make that possible? And what provision are you making for that? Because I think that's one of the most points that I've not thought of before that they've brought up in their letter.
If I can take that point first, yes, people can, and I have been explicit that people can apply for part-time working, flexible working, job share. They can apply for the same post in different ways, a combination of as many of those as they would wish to consider. We will be giving positive regard to those applications and for those requests. Probably we would need to wait until the end of the interview period to understand what kind of the different configurations could be. But whilst the posts, the roles in and of themselves are full-time, there are different ways of making a role full-time. So the structure in no way prevents those kinds of arrangements, and we are encouraging people to apply in that way.
Can I just add to that? That's not just kind of management speak from us. We get very good people into roles across the Secretariat and in the scrutiny team, that some of them are behind you, who would not be here if we insisted on full-time working. So the market delivers excellent people who don't want to work full-time, and by offering, so we genuinely positively welcome different kinds of work, part-time working, flexible working, job sharing, because we get very good people out of that who otherwise aren't available to us.
It won't be affected by this change.
Not at all.
And the process won't deter people from carrying on here. That's
it's definitely not meant to.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And if I can take your earlier points about the structure and the management, the one suggestion that I would disagree with, if I may, is that I don't think that it is a problem to have team working without line management necessarily, because we do currently do that. We do have different teams who work together without necessarily always having direct line management cutting across that. And the intention with the new structure is to have work on projects and to have project management arrangements on a case-by-case basis that don't necessarily have to be constrained by what the line management structure is. So if you look at the senior policy advisor roles, they can be seen as leading on particular strands of work. The policy advisor roles will be fully responsible for specific projects, but those projects can entail more than one person working on them, so it will naturally arise that different arrangements will be established for, say, a 3-month basis, slightly longer, depending on how long a particular project takes. In terms of some of the other points that you have made, so for the research unit, it is the research and operations manager, and that is why that post is titled that way, who is in charge of the research unit. So there is a person overseeing that. The main responsibility of that post holder will be the line management arrangements within the team and making sure that the different projects that people work on do not duplicate, do not overlap, and that is why all of the majority of the line management lies with that post holder. So it is meant to actually improve the way that we work within the team rather than try to create artificial line management separations that would then impede collaboration.
And that manager's workload, which seems also to include sort of monitoring the sort of relationships and how things are going within different projects that are going. If that's you think that's manageable?
We have checked this with human resources, who have said that there are comparators across the GLA, and that this is something that has been done in other teams in different ways. So, based on that advice, I'm confident suggesting this.
Sorry, can I just add? I noted the reference in the GLA Unison letter to a few examples, because there was a meeting with the team and Unison were present, where I talked through some examples, and I made it very clear. So it was off the top of my head. I was able to think of the two heads of office of the large party groups and the assistant director for committee member services. So that was without stepping outside of secretariat. That's people who have managed larger numbers than we're talking about here, and who have attracted very good feedback for their performance. I don't think anybody suggested that they're the heads of office, and I can name her, she's a senior person, Rebecca Arnold, are somehow failing in their line management duties, and they have had, in a couple of those cases, over 20 reports for a long period of time. So there's, in some cases it works, in other cases, we wouldn't do that, but in this case, because the policy work is elsewhere with the senior policy advisors, we do think this works.
Assembly Member Cochran.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, going back to the Unison response, one concern that it raised was that there might be a knock-on impact on committee services, and I was wondering if Ed, if you could comment on that.
I can. We have, so there's a number of things to say on that point. The note referred to as an internal note. I'll be happy to share it with members. I think I've shared it with heads of office before now about project team working, how the teams in what we call the core secretariat interact to deliver the projects. And a lot of it, the note was around sort of ways of working rather than structures. But it did, when I sent the message out, confirm a transfer of some work. That follows sort of management review, management discussion. And we are very clear that we don't think it requires additional resource. If it did, we would have created additional posts in committee services and transferred people from the scrutiny team, along with the work. That's how the TUPE legislation works. Rebecca Arnold, who's the lead on this, has, and I referred to the restructurings earlier, has built in additional capacity both to the assembly part of the committee team over time and the non-assembly part of the committee team. And she is not backwards in coming forward when additional resource is required. She knows this work very well. The committee team are well placed. They already deal with external venues, so members were at PQT the other night. There are the committee services team doing the assembly part of the operation. They deal with external venues, members, guests, organising logistics all of the time. And the view at management level was that it didn't require additional resources, and as such didn't trigger, didn't fall within scope of a restructure. But it's something we looked at, very carefully, and it's something, we wouldn't have avoided it. We're doing a big restructure. We're not, as I say, we're not being coy. If we needed to create a post in committee services as a result of what we wanted to do, then we would have done it. It seems, just telescoping right out, it seems very clear to me, and I've been here for a while, so you might ask me why we hadn't come up with this earlier, to have a committee services team doing procedures and logistics and arrangements, and a scrutiny team doing policy and kind of content, and making that division clearer seems to be a sensible way of proceeding.
Okay, thank you.
Member Hall.
Thank you. Several things. First of all, I do agree with you, Ed. Silos aren't good, and more interaction staff have. I think that's a good thing, which is why on fire, for instance, we've included the health committee and the police committee, and in that way that's helped. I also agree with ongoing tracking, but Anastasia, you said you want to change it so that you can act on an event as it occurs. I mean, I have to tell you, when you've got experts dealing with one thing, like police, I mean, we get incredible support on the police committee on things that happen there and then. Because it's their expertise, they know exactly what to look into, what to go into, how to give advice on that straight away. I'm concerned that would be lost on that, because that is actually dealing with events as they occur. I've been absolutely amazed at the amount the officer for fire has learnt in a very short period of time, but that's because she has been dedicated to that, learning about that, which is of course is very important given that Grenfell, and actually that is why she would be able to deal with things as they come across, because she has been concentrating on that one specific area. So I'm extremely concerned about that. I mean, the chair support, if at the moment, if it's police, we know exactly where to go to, fire, etc. If as an example, something happened at the police and the police is sharing with fire and maybe health, and a question comes in from that, the police chair and then the fire chair, and it's all urgent, what happens then? Because you're then sharing with the chair support, if you like. So what I mean, once you're sharing, what happens there?
Yes, so thank you, Assemblymember Hall. I fully appreciate and value the need for expertise in supporting Assembly members within the team. And that is actually precisely why there is this evaluation of the senior policy advisor role as being at grade 10. It is taking into account then availability that those team members will need to have, and B, level of knowledge and real knowledge that they will need to have of the subjects they're working on. In terms of that specific example that you have just cited, it's that is something that might happen, two requests coming in at the same time, but these senior policy advisors are of course not working alone. Whilst they may be the first point of contact for yourself, and whilst they may be the person who will ultimately respond to your request, that doesn't mean that the query or the piece of research or whatever it may be won't also be supported by the rest of the team. In fact, that is the intention in this new structure. So although the accountability for providing the communications and the service to you will lie with them, the delivery is shared across the rest of the team.
I mean, there's another aspect to this. I must say, all of us chairs are completely different. We have a different way of working because we're different human beings. Some of us have more demands than others, different demands, etc. And the person that we work with on whatever committee gets to know what we would require. And it might be different the following year if you've got a different chair. That's how it works. But they do get to know what we expect, and also they get to know what we know from a particular subject. It could be that an assembly member is put into something and suddenly the chair, because this happens, they've got no knowledge of that particular subject. They would rely on that person to be advising them. And it is very helpful as a chair to have the go-to person that is the expert, because then we can react to things that happen. Very often that person is then talking a chair through something. And I'm concerned that we'll lose the expertise for the one that is linking in with the chair and the deputy chair, because that relationship is really important, especially if you're having issues on a particular committee or panel, whatever, and you need to sort them out. You want that person available and that person to be the expert on it.
No, I fully take that point, and that will be the intention for that role. Those people will need to be available. Actually, in what you just mentioned, that there is a liaison between chair and deputy chair. At least there's also the rest of the committee, of course. That is quite a range of different interests, different people, different personalities that need even someone who is, say, dedicated to just one committee at the moment would still need to be taken into consideration in order to provide a strong service to the chair and to the rest of the committee. So in that respect, I don't think that the new structure is proposing something that is completely at odds with what we are doing now. The senior policy advisors, as the name suggests, that would be their role to provide advice, as you have identified, and their core accountability and what they will be assessed on in their performance is how well they are doing that. So I can only agree with what you've said, and we will be delivering that in the new structure.
Could I just add, just very quickly, so we are accountable for that as senior managers, but what you get is a named person for your committee, if you're the chair and lead members, named people who are leading each piece of work for that committee, and a more flexible structure behind those so that we can add or take away, move around additional support as required, and a research function.
Okay, I mean,
So the idea is that you get more out of this, and we are
but from different people, and at times, if you sit on quite a few committees, that can be difficult, I would imagine.
Well, you get at the senior level, you get a constant person,
And then
a fixed person.
Sorry,
so if you're chair of a committee, you have a senior person with recognised policy qualifications and expertise in that area.
Okay, the unison. I mean, I hear what you say. I am concerned about it.
No, I just, yeah.
And I'm really glad, Ed, that you did say this is about structure, not about people, because personally, other than when I was unhappy, and you have dealt with that, I cannot state how much support I've had as a chair of 2 committees this year from the staff, and I just can't say that high enough. The unison letter mentions the equalities situation. Are we going to be putting at risk any particular grouping of people by getting rid of the lower structures, the lower grading?
In short, no. HR have already conducted an equalities impact assessment, which assesses that there are no groups that are disproportionately impacted by this restructure. We are, of course, very mindful of considerations of any potential impacts down the line, and we have thought about how possibly to mitigate that. I mean, one of the elements of this restructure, the process of it that I mentioned, is the 3-grade ring fence. That is something that is open to, of course, everyone in the team, but ultimately the intention is to allow everyone as much opportunity to find a place in the new structure as possible. In the process for interviews, which are meant to take place mid to the end of April, everyone in the team who would be interested in having that representation on the panel can request for BAME, disability, and LGBT representation, which we are committed to providing to the extent that it's possible. And looking further down the line, because of course we do need to be seeking to improve the diversity in the scrutiny team, but also in the Secretariat as a whole. We have a Secretariat-wide, we will be launching a Secretariat-wide BAME internship program, which will see 2 or 3 people joining us in autumn for a 9-month period, rotating between teams, and hopefully providing a much better pipeline of candidates for us down the line.
Okay, it does mean though, doesn't it, that some of the staff are going to have to apply for a job that's about 3 grades above?
So that is linked with how we have assessed the new structure in relation to the existing structure. So at the moment, in terms of the research work undertaken by the team, this is done at 3 levels. So scrutiny manager, assistant scrutiny manager, project officer. In my assessment, sometimes the distinctions can be, are not particularly clear, particularly as everyone sometimes can be working on a similar piece of research. So what this new structure really brings to the fore is realizing that we are all here to do a particular piece of work for Assembly members. There is no need for arbitrary distinctions as exists now, and ultimately recognizing better the work that members of the team who are currently at more junior posts do. So it is, in effect, demonstrating that we recognize the level of knowledge, the amount of work, and the dedication that is required to it by assessing that role in at a higher grading.
I couldn't, again, just to come in at the end, the 3-grade ring fence, in my experience, I don't think it's been applied at that scope before, so there was quite a lot of discussion about it, and you can see that we've taken some quite significant decisions here in terms of what we're proposing to you, and to the Chief Officer and to the Mayor's Office as well, in terms of the scale of changes. So we've not ducked big changes, and if a 3-grade ring fence wasn't appropriate, we wouldn't have done it. But we think that people have a realistic chance within that framework.
Going forward, though, don't you think it's? I'm a great believer personally in having lower grades there to get new people in, to nurture them forward, so that they've got somewhere also to go. When you've got more of a flat system, there's nowhere really for people to go other than just up within the own grading. But when you've got people paid at a lower level, they can aspire to do something else. They can come in and learn, and we can grow our own, if you like. Sure. And I've always been a massive believer in doing that, because it gives other people's opportunities that they wouldn't be able to. Because to come in at a higher grade, they've had their opportunities somewhere and they've moved on. But I just sometimes think that looking at lower grading gives people more of an opportunity to prove their worth, and that's what one of my main issues with looking at this structure. Sorry, Joan, I've taken a long time.
Assemblymember Arnold.
Thank you. I suppose everybody's had their own, has registered their own personal thoughts on this. So let me start by registering mine. I mean, I think it's amazing that it's a structure that's been tweaked over 19 years, but has not gone through this sort of review. I think that's, you'd find that to be unusual. And then linked to that, what I can say over the 19 years, alongside my colleague, Mr. Deval, here, is we have seen officers come who have stayed and done brilliant work, and then we've seen new officers appointed into those posts, and because of their skills that they're appointed up, they just get right in there and carry on the work. Because no officer is linked to a chair or a particular group of members. They bring their skills, and it's really the job specification that I'd like to talk about away from here, so that we know in terms of the job specification that we're actually going to then match the individual skills to that job. Because what I have seen, and I have suffered from for many years, is I've seen and experienced people in senior posts who have not been able to do their jobs, who in fact the junior post grade here, 5, in my experience, that's what I've done, have done the job better, have brought new thinking and have been working. And for me, if this new structure gets rid of that disadvantage that is in the old, then I would welcome that. And I've got numerous experience of that across a number of committees. So I think it's about the job specification, and then making sure that the person has got the skills to go into that. And then linked to that, and I think Sean raises it, it's maintaining our commitment to flexibility and how you match those posts so that, you know, the service is seamless. And so my first question is what are the vacancy factors you're talking about the new structure? And was that to just give a little bit of a carrot to this paper to say that you're going to make a reduction of 52,000? Ed?
Yes, I'll take that. No, that's not that is just a straightforward fact. The Assembly's not making, unless I've missed something dramatic, not offering up any reductions in its actual budget. So the budget stays as has been signed off by the Mayor and the Assembly and is there for the Assembly to use.
What's this point at 7.3?
That's simply just costing out the new structure in the way that the organisation does it. The cost will be very different in reality depending on appointment decisions through the ring-fenced interviews, because there will be people at the top of the grades and with experience. So the actual costs are likely to be very different to this, but the GLA has a way of doing it. There are, just very quickly, 5.
Okay, so that answers my question then, if I'm right.
Yeah.
You haven't taken out any posts out of the system because they were vacant?
No.
Good. No, because that was a question that I had.
But we are proposing an entirely new structure, so there hasn't been any deletions of existing posts
Yes,
yet.
you haven't deleted any posts yet?
No.
No, okay, that's what I wanted to know. And then the policy clusters that you talk about, how are they different to the current clusters that we have? On page 40, those groupings seem to me to be the groupings we have at the moment.
In effect, this is how we have logically sometimes collaborated, but it is not provided for in the current structure. We do not have clusters at the moment per se.
Okay.
Yeah, and so this is meant to reflect the collaboration that does already take place in a way that puts it black on white.
Okay, right. No, so that's new. I thought there was. I got the impression that they were already clustered like that.
Well, there are good examples of collaborative working. What we're talking about there is the structure.
Yeah.
At the moment, the structure isn't based around those clusters.
Yeah.
It's based around committees.
Yeah, and I do understand, I think, a point that people have got personal about in terms of their committee experience. Because of workload. So if we just deal with workload, clearly there is a committee that meets, seems to me, every other day. Every week? Is it the police committee?
Twice a month.
Twice a month.
20 times a year.
Should be more.
Should be more, and I have no idea about fire. But have you weighted the demands of these committees? I mean, you've put up a cluster, so you've attracted us to this cluster. So I'm just saying, on looking at this cluster, it would seem to me that that team around fire and crime, fire, resilience and emergency planning, well, that would seem to me would get quite a heavy weighting. So in your thinking, are you saying then that you would then expect more policy advisors, more research analyst time, and then just the one senior policy lead to that cluster? Is that what you're saying?
So for each of the clusters, yes, there is one senior policy lead, but the teams would grow as much as is needed.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the input from the staff would come from policy advisors, research as and when required, because the work that was being done. Whereas at the moment you have people who are working just to a committee. Yes. You'd get more flexibility across the work programme. Okay. And then timing. For Ed, I'm not sure how you imagine the timeline. So take us from this meeting. So from this meeting, you will then be receiving, not at this meeting, but a response from this committee on behalf of the Assembly. Because it's my understanding individual Assembly members have had the opportunities to feed in. And then what happens? What's the timeline then that you imagine?
Well, the formal consultation period closes on Monday, close of play on Monday. We have, of course, already received a unison response. We will also receive potentially individual responses from team members, any other responses. All of this will be considered by myself. This will be passed on to the chief officer. I will be responding to all the feedback that I have received. And once all of that has been considered, there may be changes here and there, The final proposals will be made public shortly thereafter. That should be very early April. And then if the proposal is to go ahead with the new structure, meaning that there will be new interviews for new posts, then that will be taking place throughout April. And the intention is to have the new structure established by the time of the AGM and the start of the new work programme year.
So that would be May.
Correct.
So you'd have, in a sense, a year of running this in before the next administration. Okay. And then you talked about staff being able to move up 1 or 2 or 3 points. But in HR terms, isn't there a thing where the job that they're applying for would have to have some percentage relationship to the current one they're in? Have I got that wrong?
I think you might be referring to assimilation.
Oh, am I referring to
in terms of,
assimilation? Okay. So you're saying a project officer grade 5 in the old structure, you're saying could be looking to apply for 3 posts? Isn't that what you said?
A project officer would have the opportunity to go for 2 roles in the new structure.
2 roles in the new structure.
And they'll be offered ring-fenced interviews.
Okay, and how have you come about that? Have you come about looking at the current job specification of the project officer and the new job specification that you've devised for these new roles? Yeah.
So yes, but nobody's being assimilated, which is where that percentage comes in.
Right.
But we've applied. Traditionally, it's a 1-grade ring fence. Sometimes there have been 2-grade ring fences. In this case, we applied a 3-grade ring fence because we think it's appropriate to allow people, because they have got relevant skills and experience from the work that they've been doing, and they'll be offered the opportunity of these new 2 new roles for some of the people, and say up to 4 new roles.
It just seems that I've got 2 more questions, Chair, and everybody else has had their time, so I will be looking to get my 3 questions in. It seems to me there was a little bit of confidence that I picked up that staff would be able to apply for the new posts, and that there would be... I just got a sense that you were trying to say there might be very few redundancies. Am I wrong there?
Well, it's not our aim. Our aim is to get a structure that delivers better than what we've got. That's not saying there's delivering badly, but we would like to deliver better. So we haven't started out from the intention to make redundancies, but we appreciate there could be. But we have also, what I was trying to assure other members of, we haven't set a 3-grade ring fence sort of just airily or without a great deal of attention, because we'd be messing people around. If people did not have a realistic shot, we wouldn't have done it. That doesn't mean that we can preempt what actually then happens in an interview process.
It's an important question for me, for Mary. Do these people hold GLA contracts, or do they hold assembly contracts?
GLA contracts.
So then if they were not able to then get a job in the new structure, they would still have a contract with the GLA to be slotted in elsewhere.
Well, then we'd start running through the redeployment processes
They'd
that apply normally, across the GLA.
Yeah, no, I just wanted that to be clear about that. And then the last thing, it's about equalities. I could be facetious and say there are no groups at risk, because your equalities profile is so poor, isn't it?
No, that's
isn't it really?
Yes,
I mean, it's 99% white, and what's the female-male breakdown?
Remember now.
I would imagine. Do you think it's 50-50? I doubt it.
No, it's more yeah.
Does anybody know?
I'll get you the precise figures. I do know. I'm trying to rack my brain. We have got that. information on.
It's not up there as a shining example of,
No.
of what we'd look for. So, so that's why there are no groups at risk here. Yeah, but then you said, you know, indeed.
Well, just slightly, it's just on a sort of technical point. Nobody is more at risk than anybody else because
of the
everybody's
whole
at risk.
scale,
That's
because of the whole
HR
scale.
formulation.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm not resiling from your basic point, which is the diversity is.
Yes, because
not good
even with a whole scale, if you did have members of the protected groups, then you would have to then do an EIA to take into consideration the impact on them. But
Indeed.
I think
but
we
my
agree.
point is that the current, if you did a policies impact assessment of the current
Yes.
team, it's not good enough.
It's not good enough.
So the whole situation, in my view, is not good enough in that regard.
Okay, and so that then leads us to 4.7D, where you say, whilst there are no protected groups that are disproportionately impacted, improving the diversity of its workforce continues to be a key focus for the Assembly Secretariat. And I've got loads of questions about that, because I would say if you haven't managed it in 19 years,
Yeah.
how does a new structure enable you to do that? Mary, what are your plans? They haven't managed to change the profile for this area since it was started. What's the new structure going to help them? How is that going to help them?
I think it's less about the new structure. I don't think the new structure itself won't change that, will it? It's other work we have in train to make sure that right across the organisation we are doing better in terms of representation of all the groups we know that we are doing poorly. So I think that's a broader question for the work we're doing on diversity and inclusion, rather than one that relates directly to this restructure.
Can I just say, sorry, just on that, so one of the things that we're doing, Anastasia referred to it earlier, is the BAME internship that we're starting, because we are looking now to grow our own. What happens we've tried all sorts of interesting and innovative, creative things to recruit a more diverse workforce. And we've ended up like Wile E. Coyote with the legs spinning, but actually the statistics not improving because people come and people go. But when we've really looked hard at it, our attraction rates are very low, and therefore our shortlisting rates are low and our appointment rates are low, and then a couple of years later people leave and we end up with not a good enough diversity. So we are now going to grow our own, bring people in, train them over not just a couple of weeks internship, but over a 9-month period, so they get substantive experience that we hope will lead to them being successfully appointed. So we take, say, 3 a year, that costs a bit of money, and then over a 4-year period that's 12 people who will all be BAME people who we hope to be in a position that they can apply for posts around the directorate. Now if we get a successful recruitment rate out of that, say 9 or 10 over a 4-year period, well that percentage-wise starts to change the supertanker direction. It's not the only thing that we're doing, but it's one of the things that is just about to start.
All the best with that.
Okay, Mary, you indicated you want to go?
Well, only Chairman to say I'd like to say a few words at the appropriate moment, when you're ready for me to do
It
that.
may very well be the appropriate moment because every member's spoken and I'm going to draw us to close on that.
Okay, so it's been very helpful for me actually sitting in here as well and hearing members' views, because ultimately, as has been said several times, I need to approve this structure, and I'm trying to balance obviously supporting Ed and Anastasia in the development of the structure, listening to all of your views, and also of course mindful to the consultation responses that are coming in. I mean, I agree with those of you who have already said that 19 years is too long to leave a team and a structure going without any proper review. I think this is not the only place across the GLA that has happened, but one of the things I feel very strongly about is we need to get into a much more regular and routine refresh of team structures, of job descriptions and everything else. And I think that's part of what I'm going to try and introduce. However, we are where we are, and because it is 19 years, 15 years, whatever it is, that makes life difficult for everybody, I think. It makes life difficult for people coming in, I think, and rightly saying it is time to have a look at this. It makes it very difficult for staff sitting in the structure as well, because the likelihood is that the change is going to be much more significant if you only do it every 20 years than if you are more routinely considering things and refreshing things. So I think it is difficult for everybody. 2 or 3 things that have come up today I just wanted, if I could, just comment on, so you know I have clocked these. I haven't seen the letter from Unison yet. I think that's only just arrived. I know I will see it, but I'll be very interested to see what that says, because of course I remain in dialogue with our Unison colleagues anyway, routinely, so I'm very interested to see what they have said. On the matter of part-time roles, job shares, you know, we are aspiring to be an exemplar, inclusive employer. And for me, at the heart of that means that all sorts of people in all sorts of circumstances are able to access jobs here at the GLA. And so we must remain absolutely true to that as we finalise this structure. I know that Ed and Anastasia are remaining true to that in their thinking. So again, I'll just be keeping an eye on that going forward, because that's absolutely the heart of the employer that the GLA is. And that must continue to apply wherever we're doing restructures. The only third bit I would say, I would like to understand a little bit more some aspects of this structure. I mean, for me, a span of control of 14 or more is on the face of it too great a span of control to ask one manager to manage. Interesting, Ed has said there are other examples of that. I've also observed that there are an awful lot of examples across the GLA of one-on-one managers or one-on-two, which again I think is also wrong at the other end of the spectrum. So that's something I've already got my eye on, and it's a good opportunity, I think, for me to actually have a little bit more of a look at the span of controls suggested here, because just because we've done them before doesn't necessarily make them right for the future. So again, I would just like to look at that a little bit more. But you know, I come back to my first point that leaving things long then make things difficult. And you know, I think I want to try and find a way through this with my chief officer hat on that is supportive of Ed and Anastasia, who have taken on accountability for this restructure. To members too, I think your point, Assembly Member Connell, about this needs to be owned by members, and certainly the work programme needs to be owned by members. I'm absolutely with you on that. And then we have a large number of members of staff who are understandably worried about this, but I think also need to recognise that it is not the fault of people around the table now that this has taken so long to review, but we need to find a way as quickly as we can through this review into the new structure with, as we've said, decent run-up for everybody to get used to that before we face change in 2020. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. There's one question based on what you've just said, which is of course around the line management comments that you've made. If you review this and you take from it that that is not going to fit, then that doesn't make the structure work. And we're quite a long way down the line with this. How quickly are you going to do that? And if you are seeking to make a change to that, when? And when will it be brought to the committee? Because according to the timetable on page 31 of the report, the ring fence interviews, so your formal approval is scheduled to be early April, and the ring fence interviews will take place in mid to late April, with the proposed scheme being implemented in May. We do have an oversight meeting on the 8th of April, but I think the intervention, if you are going to intervene around management structure, that could have a fundamental impact on the entire structure that's been proposed. And conscious of timetabling with the committee, but more importantly, the staff who've had to live under this since Christmas, I think would probably appreciate this process being brought to an end sooner rather than later. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
The last thing I want to do is extend this process. I don't think that's fair on anybody. I just reflect. Now, like I said, I haven't seen the Unison letter yet, but you know, this question of this breadth of reporting line comes through that. I guess what I'm reflecting, Chairman, is that's resonating with some of my own concerns about spans of control across the organisation. So, you know, it might be that we conclude that actually it is right here and we can go ahead as planned. I just want the opportunity to understand that a little bit more. Like you've all asked, how is some of that going to work?
Well, two requests then, as we bring this item to a close. Firstly, I think members will probably appreciate seeing the written response to the Unison letter when it is sent, if that could be circulated, and then included in the papers of the meeting in April. I mean, the Unison letter only arrived in my office yesterday, Mary. It's dated the 18th as well, so it's not been hidden or anything. And secondly, I think it would also be useful for members to get an early sight of your intentions when you've had a look at this and you've looked at the Unison letter and everything else, whether you're proposing to intervene or not. Because I think if you're going to, and you're going to intervene around the line management aspect of the proposals, then it changes everything fundamentally. And I think that the paper will need to be brought back to the Oversight Committee on the 8th of April. So if you could let us know either way, I think that would be quite useful. Are members content with that?
Yeah.
All right. We are requested to note the contents of the report and response. I think we've more or less given that. In terms of response, cautiously accepting the report, I think probably is a fair summary of what I've heard today. Members are happy with that.
Are we writing or are we just accepting it in committee?
We're accepting it in committee.
Okay.
Subject to what I've just said about Mary, because if obviously the head of paid service, sorry, I keep calling you that, the chief officer, decides to intervene and make a material change, then I think it will need to come back here in April.
And there's a distinction between that and the work programmes?
Yeah, the work programme is totally separate.
No, I get that.
There's an obvious link, but it's not connected to the region.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay, is that agreed, members?
Yes.
Agreed. Okay, fine. Thank you. Item 7 is the allocation of the Assembly budget. Proposal set paper is read. Do members have any questions? No. Can we agree the overall proposed allocation to the Assembly budget for 1920 as detailed in the report? Agreed. And can we approve the general use of the Assembly's budget as allocated to the relevant teams within the Secretariat by the committee in the 1920 year? Agreed. Item 8 is the work programme, noting that there will be a meeting next month, unusually during the Easter break. Is that noted? Okay, item 9 is the date of the next meeting, which will be at 10 o'clock in here on the 8th of April. There is no other any urgent business, so the meeting is closed.